Let's go ahead and talk to Martin. Martin. How shall I say it in the UK? What's the right way to pronounce your name?
It's Martin.
I guess Martin is fine.
Martin is fine. Okay. All right, Martin, what do you got for us? You are suggesting, it says here that you have reasons we should be Republican, and you consider yourself MAGA. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's true.
But you aren't an American, or are you?
No, I'm not. No.
Okay. You just hope America MAGAs, and I assume you want to make Britain great again or something too.
I certainly agree with Trump on a number of issues, yeah.
Great. All right. Well, lay it for us why we should be Republican, other than to not be designated terrorists by our fascist government.
Yeah, so when me and Jovan were speaking earlier on the line, we spoke a bit about affirmative action. We kind of had an interesting conversation about that. So I don't know if you want to talk about that again, Jovan, or if we can talk about some different issues today.
You and I have two different definitions of the word interesting, but okay.
Yeah, I have no interest in it. We did a call on DEI the other day. Most people who bring up affirmative action are totally unaware that quotas, for example, have not been a thing for a long time, how affirmative action actually works. So if you've already done it, I don't see why we redo it.
Okay, sure. So, I mean, I am aware of quotas, but I'm happy to move on to a different issue that I've sort of studied for a while.
That is to say, you're aware quotas haven't been a part of affirmative action for decades, when you say you're aware of them, right?
Yeah, there was like a California case that was brought to the Supreme Court, and that was essentially struck down. So you're right, it's been banned for several decades.
Great. So the main reason why people are opposed to affirmative action has been banned for quite some time. So then what is the actual detail? What is the actual thing you do want to discuss?
So I was going to discuss a recent book that I read by Michael Schellenberger called San Francisco. It looks at essentially drug legalization in America and how it's been a disaster. So I think that's one potential reason to vote Republican.
And which drug legalization in America has been? You talking about pharmaceutical drugs? You talking about weed? What are you talking about?
I'm talking about a range of mind-altering drugs like fentanyl, cocaine, ecstasy, marijuana, things like that.
Okay, and they've been legalized? Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's what the book details. He looks at sort of drug legalization on the west coast of America, places like San Francisco, Oregon, Washington State, places like that. And he looks at how it's sort of damaged communities, how it's caused homelessness, these sorts of details.
But they aren't legal. Fentanyl, cocaine, marijuana is legal in a lot of places, and there have been, not only have there not been negative things traced to that, there have been positive. So you're going to have to bring this out to actual, like, more concepts you understand than just generally say there's a book making this claim, because I'm not going to, on the face of a book that you've offered, just go like, all right, well, let's assume because it's in a book, it's true.
Yeah, I mean, he's a person who's been a resident in San Francisco for a while, and he sort of details his own experience of seeing drugs effectively decriminalized in America. In terms of
decriminalized is not the same thing as legalized. So first of all, we've already gotten off to a different start. So you think that Republicans believe drugs should still be criminalized for the individual, right?
There'll be variations in both groups. There'll be Republicans who support legalization, but in general, you find Republicans are much more hostile to legalization than their Democratic counterparts.
But are we talking about legalization or decriminalization?
We're talking about both because, as you point out, marijuana is being legalized, but some drugs are being decriminalized. So we're talking about both.
But we aren't really, because marijuana is not anywhere near in the same category, unless we're now going to start talking about alcohol as well. Marijuana is nowhere in the near same category as fentanyl or cocaine. And it's very convenient to try and like group those together. No, we are legalizing. By the way, we still haven't at the federal level. And you can't say that MAGA is opposed to decriminalizing or legalizing marijuana, since Donald Trump is even talking about doing so. So when you're talking about fentanyl and cocaine and the way these are supposedly ravaging communities, why do you believe it should be criminal for an individual to take fentanyl and do the damage to themselves if they haven't harmed somebody else, as opposed to just, why should it be illegal as opposed to decriminalized?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would view fentanyl taking in the same way as I view drink driving. It doesn't necessarily cause harm, but it puts other people at greater risk. And so if we look at the countries with the lowest rates of crime, we find that they're countries which have very strict laws on drugs. Places like South Korea, Singapore, Indonesia have very low rates of crime, and it's partly due to the sort of stringent drug laws that they have. So yes, if you're harming yourself, you might think it's no one else's business. But if you're putting others at risk, then that's an issue.
I think that you're
Mark,
also...
Mark,
Yeah, go ahead.
Really quickly, you would agree that alcohol should also be illegal then?
If we look at the countries with the lowest rates of crime, they're countries where alcohol is legal. So I'm open-minded on that issue, but I haven't seen the data showing that we need to ban alcohol in order to reduce crime levels.
Well, if we're reducing the crime levels, your claim is okay. Let me actually ask this: crime is already being reduced in the U.S. Crime is already on the decline. So what does it matter?
Well, obviously, crime is still actually quite high in the US compared to Western Europe. So you should aspire for crime to be as low as possible.
It doesn't address what I just said. I said crime is on the decline. It has been since the 90s.
You're right about that, but you can't apportion that to necessarily drug policy.
Well, but you can portion the crime rate being high to, of course, if you legalize drug, or if you have here's my thing. I believe in the US, especially if you have drugs criminalized, you're going to have higher crime rates because of the people getting arrested for the criminalization of drugs.
So why aren't crime rates high in places like Singapore, Japan, and South Korea then?
Well, Japan has a much vastly different healthcare. It can be a litany of reasons: healthcare, poverty, but Japan also has Japan especially has a completely different culture around crime than the United States does.
Yes, but that's true. But if all things are equal and we look at two countries that are identical in every respect except drug policy, the countries
they're
not a lower rate of drug.
Jesus Christ, you can't even say California is identical in every respect. They're nowhere near the same.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know the difficulties in studying societies when you're looking at multiple different factors and you're trying to apportion a causal link. But if we do look at the data, I can cite some studies if you like.
Yeah, but after you acknowledge the premise that if we accept that they're identical in every way except drug policy, that would be a really stupid exercise to do. We could easily go with instead they're identical in every way except gun policies, somewhere they actually do have a big difference and does affect not only crime rates, but the type of crimes and the impact of crime. And at the end of the day, you're here as a person with the MAGA conservative Make America Great Again side going like, hey, on the basis of ignoring all those other things it could be, I think we should be focusing on the freedoms we should be removing from people and not things like, hey, does prison and criminalizing these things actually help the individual? Or would something like access to rehab and drug recovery programs, and also penalizing a pharmaceutical industry, because that's the number one thing you're fucking ignoring here when we're talking about like fentanyl-based crimes. Where did these people's addictions come from in the first place? And then you're pointing to a bunch of countries that don't treat healthcare like a capitalist jackpot. And that's clearly where a big part of the difference is that we commodify healthcare and we allow our pharmaceutical industries to use advertising and marketing practices with doctors to get people addicted to drugs in the first place and make the concept of a drugs fix your culture or your problems culture in the first place, but then not extending healthcare to these individuals, not extending. Look, dude, Martin, if you want to say like if California would criminalize the drugs, but also give everybody access to good healthcare, give everybody access to welfare when they need it, housing, all of that stuff, all the things that we know reduce poverty, then you might be onto something, but it would happen either way, whether or not you criminalize the drugs at that point.
Yeah, no, I'm in favor of free healthcare. So I'm from the UK and I do actually support a lot of those policies that you just mentioned.
And great, it would be a bigger reduction in drug issues to give everybody access to good comprehensive healthcare than just being harsher on drug crimes, especially in America, where if you want to be sure somebody is a drug addict, send them to prison for drug crimes.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what they've done in Portugal, they have decriminalized it, but they also have mandatory treatment. So would you be open to something like that as a solution?
I don't know that I'm open to mandatory treatment if the only crime the person has done is against themselves. But it was like earlier, you're like, well, I would say fentanyl is like drunk driving, which isn't true. Driving on fentanyl is like drunk driving. If a person is getting high on fentanyl but hasn't harmed somebody else, if this is possible, the pharmaceutical industry seems to think so since they still prescribe it, then I'm not going to say just because there was fentanyl in your system, you must go to mandatory recovery. Otherwise, why wouldn't we also force a person who does fentanyl for legitimate medical reasons to end their cycle with mandatory recovery? But certainly anybody who is committing crimes or whatever, I would say it is better than putting them in prison to give them a program by which they get better and are taken care of. And on the other side, will have access to income, housing, and all of that. It's the fact that they don't have access to those before or after committing the crime that the crimes are happening in the first place.
Would you agree that if a drug increases someone's likelihood of committing crime, then the government has a right or a duty to outlaw it?
No, because if it isn't that simple. You are saying that as though it is that simple, and it isn't.
But also, you're not holding the standard, Martin. You're not holding the standard for other things. Poverty also has a higher likelihood of increasing someone's rate of crime. We're not outlawing poverty.
We should outlaw poverty. We should put the president in jail if they're. We should put presidents in prison if they have too high of poverty under their belt. I don't know that I actually believe that literally, but we should definitely penalize and get rid of politicians who are, especially when there's lots of money to push around to other people, when they are prioritizing billionaires. By the way, you've already lost the MAGA crowd that you said you believe in universal healthcare. You're definitely not MAGA. So far, we have lost healthcare privileges and premiums are about to skyrocket even more. Even though they're not supposed to discriminate me against me upon the basis of the fact that I have pre-existing conditions. According to law, they're not supposed to do that. My premium every month is $489 a month for my health insurance. That doesn't actually pay for any of the healthcare itself. I still then pay copays for my drugs, for my visits, and everything else. So Martin, you saying I should be a Republican when you disagree with MAGA on the fundamental thing that I think is the biggest issue, and I would absolutely vote for an extremely imperfect Democrat. I would enthusiastically campaign for Gavin Newsom if he would do three things: stop bastardizing trans people, condemn the genocide in Gaza, and promote Medicare for all. If he would do those three things, that's all it would take, and I would be a loud, ardent supporter of a liberal like Gavin Newsom. You're sitting here saying that thing that's a deal breaker for MAGA, you believe in. I think you even can acknowledge that the thing that you are describing, these higher crime rates, that if people had access to comprehensive care, it would actually have a bigger impact than making the drugs illegal, which currently send them into an American cycle that commit a person to addiction. You are saying vote for the guys who won't do the more important thing than making drugs illegal is fucking crazy, Martin.
No, but I also just want to touch on. I want to just touch on what you said before. Like, it is not impossible to regulate out poverty, right? It's not impossible to increase social safety nets so that people who are in poverty don't have to suffer as much. There's a million things we could do. If we know for a fact that the number one cause of crime, at least low-level crime like what you're talking about, the crime we're talking about isn't even close to the top crimes that are committed in the country. They're just the ones anyone seems to care about. But we know for a fact that like the way we address this is by addressing systemic poverty. So how about we do that instead? Why criminalize someone, like Jimmy said earlier, for a victimless crime?
So you should criminalize it because it's not actually a victimless crime. People who take drugs are more likely to damage their frontal lobes, and that can impact their likelihood of committing violent crime.
That is, until they do something that actually hurts somebody else, it is victimless. You can't be punished for something you might do in the future.
And you're trying to play the like you're the victim of your own crime. That's not how any judicial system works. Say that.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you are, because you're saying the prefrontal lobe, there's no victim because the prefrontal lobe degrades. You're saying it raises the odds that they will commit the crime. We don't preempt crimes in this country. People who have a higher odds of being serial killers, until they commit the crime, they don't do the time.
So how do you feel about gun control then, Jimmy?
Gun control is a completely separate issue. We can get onto that. But by the way, Martin, once we do, if you're saying we can preempt crime, do know that the Republicans are also against going after people. Remember down in Tennessee with the whole Tiger King? He kept getting away with sending death threats to that Carol Baskin because, as the guy said, in Tennessee, we believe in the freedom of speech. And you can say you were going to kill somebody, but until you kill somebody, we don't do anything.
I mean, that's absurd. You shouldn't be, saying people.
It's both not analogous and I am pro-arming Americans. The only limits I would put on are the guns that are made specifically for crimes, like assault rifles, as far as how many people you can kill in an instance, because then you're getting to the level of military shit. Everybody at some level draws this line. Nobody who is reasonable believes any private citizen should have access to a nuke because that is too dangerous. And so where that line belongs is the only place we're going to disagree. But Martin, I own assault rifles. I own guns, and go look at my social media. I've been telling leftists to go buy guns like crazy. So good luck with your gun argument.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that if we, from a utilitarian standpoint, if we can ban a substance that might damage a person's ability to understand or comprehend reality, then I think we should do so if it reduces crime rates.
Wait, there's a difference between banning a substance and criminalizing the substance. I don't disagree that some drugs probably should be banned, right? I don't necessarily think I disagree with that. The problem is when you criminalize it, because what we know about criminalization is it leads to lack of care. That's why even Japan, who does have lower drug use than us, the people that do use drugs oftentimes relapse a lot more in Japan because they don't have comprehensive care methods set up. They focus more on criminalization than they do on the actual care of addiction. So when we're talking about using the drugs, it's absolutely a victimless crime. Use of drugs, possession of drugs under a certain amount, I'd say probably is the way you should do it. And then the purchase of drugs are all victimless crimes. Now, if they coincide with other crimes, that's different. Those are other crimes. But those three things you do not victimize another person by doing.
I mean, hypothetically, if we brought in a drug strategy that would reduce ownership and it led to a reduction in crime, would you at least accept it as being a success?
What's the strategy? If it's just banning, we've done that already.
If you want to say a success is in, success doesn't only mean that the overall goal, this is why we talk about AI. If you tell AI to reduce poverty and AI builds a nuke and kills all poor people, it did reduce poverty, but the nuking poor people is not the way to reduce poverty. Let me ask you this, Martin. What percentage of, in America, what percentage of the federal prison population identify as atheist? What would you guess it is? Are you Googling it? What's with the pause? Oh, Martin hung up. Was that one too hard? Because I was just going to go with Martin's reasoning here. 0.07% of the American federal prison population identifies as atheist. So if we're going to continue to talk about things that lead you more likely to commit crimes, clearly there is disproportionately, you are more likely to commit a crime if you are a Christian, if criminals are the people who go to prison, and, especially, that's who criminals are, the people who go to prison, according to Republican logic. So if you are 99%, if 99.9% of the population in federal prison is religious, it's something like 60 or 70% of that being some type of Christian, then I guess it would be good to ban religion, right? By that same thing, because it would reduce crime, because you would be less likely. If you're more likely to commit a crime because you're taking certain drugs, again, one's prescribed by the pharmaceutical company, but we're only worried about, I think Martin and his people are only worried about when you get that from a black guy instead of from, Walgreens, that's when it's a problem. We need to put those people, we need to preempt their crime. Well, let's preempt all the crime based on the prison records, only 0.07%. So if you don't identify as an atheist, you're more likely. Let's ban all that theism, right?
I want to know what percentage of people in Japanese prisons on drug charges are.
Yeah, well, but even why stop there? Go to Duterte and Erdogan, executing in the streets drug dealers and stuff. And boy, there's a reduction in drug use there. So where do we stop on the like, look, wouldn't you consider that a success? Wouldn't you consider that?
28 as of 2020, 28% of all new male prisoners in Japan are incarcerated for drug offenses, 30% of new female. My problem is, and then we can move on to the next person. My problem is this, we're claiming that Japan is better because crime is down, but that's because they're just throwing people into prison without looking at the underlying cause of the drug use. So yeah, of course, crime is down when you're just throwing people into prison and not addressing care. It doesn't actually solve the issue. Throwing away the people you don't want to see in society doesn't solve the issue of addiction. It doesn't solve the issue of how do we keep people from using drugs in the first place. None of that is actually done by these methods.
But you're also, if you're born in Japan, your life is provided for more by default than in America, right? Like that's going to be the case. And then there's also America is a huge country and we have access to the drugs. We have so many drugs being poured into this country. And before people are like, yeah, by the illegal immigrants. No, totally legally. We are in such a drug fucking culture that we're just ignoring the fact that our biggest drug enemy isn't the cartel, it's the pharmaceutical companies. The second biggest one is when you start to get into cartels and shit. Though, arguably, it would still be like poverty. What's that?
Fentanyl is primarily trafficked by American citizens.
Yeah, like you guys are, but these are just the facts, and you got to stop arguing with those. You got to stop.
If you like this debate and you want to see more debates like this, head over to the Lines page at QAnon Line or Jimmy Snow on the Line at Jimmy Snow.